Hey everyone, welcome to the Meridian Learning and Development Hangout with Fistful of Talent. Today we're talking about leadership and training, and I'm joined by Kris Dunn, CHRO of Kinetics, and Tim Sackett, who's the president of HRU Technical Resources. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Kris has to figure out how to
I had to unmute there. I'm doing great as well, Allison. Good to be here.
All right, let's kick it off. My first question is, so why can't you just throw a list of what you believe in leadership up on the website, paint it against the walls, and be done with it?
So I'll go first. So we're talking about leadership. That's what 95% of the world does, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Just throw something up on the website, on the walls. Maybe some corporate values. That sounds like leadership to me. I'm joking.
It's every vision statement, right, that people put up?
Yeah. So to answer your question, Allison, that's what the majority of the world does, and they're not getting great results. And that's why we're talking about leadership today, I think, because there's probably a better way. There's no, single right way to do it. But it's just like, do you try and do more than that from a leadership perspective? I think most people don't. Tim, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you take a look at it, and if you put, whether it's the leadership perspective or values or whatever you want to call it, right? They always have this big name for it. If you ask most of the people in the organization, they can't even tell you what it is. So if you're not living it, if you're not breathing it, if you're not doing it and showing it through action, the words are meaningless, right?
Totally agree. Totally agree.
All right, so my next question is, are successories a good idea for office environments?
So I actually gave you this question. So Tim, I'll let you go first. The topic is successories, which I love and hate all at the same time. Mostly hate. Go, Tim.
Well, I'm going to go the other way for it, because I don't necessarily hate successories, right? I think because it doesn't matter if it's the stupid posters that say reach for the stars or whatever it might be. That's all the bad kind of office level jokes. But whether you want to name your conference rooms quirky stuff, or if you want to put rub-ons on the wall, the question comes back to, are you living all those sayings that you're putting out there? And so to me, if you're living it and you're doing it, then successories is a good idea, because it just kind of compounds the message that you're already acting upon. But if you're putting them out there and saying reach for the stars, and then every time someone tries to stand up, you punch them in the face, then it's probably not a good idea.
So successories for the uninitiated are the things you put up on the wall, usually framed, that have some kind of aspirational picture, like Tim and I rowing, in the same direction. Yeah. We would be rowing, and it would say teamwork in big bold letters, and then it would have, sometimes blah, 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 blah. Most of you know what that is. But I think I hate them. I'm going to be honest with you. I think what's interesting about corporate values, which are tied at least somewhat to leadership and successories, is the fact that I think a lot of employees expect those to be there, and they want desperately to think that all those things are true. So successories, the values you have on your website, the things they want to believe about the leadership and the culture of your company, which are kind of intertwined as well, they want to believe all those things are true. So it's, I think a lot of companies put them up because they're just expected.
Yeah, Kris is kind of a cynic. I mean, we all know that, and that's why we love him. But it's the same, Kris. It's no different. You name quirky names for your, conference rooms at Kinetics, and if you wouldn't live by that and having fun in the workplace and driving your culture, it's the same stuff. It's the same thing as putting one of those crazy successory posters on the wall.
I'm going to disagree with you, and then we'll go back to Allison. What I would tell you is that naming your conference rooms quirky names just says that I like 80s pop culture.
It's all about your culture. You're driving at your organization.
It just says that I like Ferris Bueller. That's all it says. It doesn't mean that I'm going to lead like Ferris Bueller.
Yes, it does.
No, it does not. All right, back to Allison. Let's keep going.
Right.
We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah. All right. This one's a little more serious. So, what is the difference between leadership and management? And should you distinguish between the two in organizations?
So I'll go first on this one, Tim. I think there's a difference clearly. I mean, leaders, especially in a big company, are different than line managers. I do think that from time to time we talk about leadership like it's this vaulted thing and that it's not directly connected to people who are line managers in your company. So I think when leadership gets a little too aspirational and it kind of disconnects from the conversations that line managers have to have with the people on their teams, when it gets too disconnected and it's too different, that's where the cynic in me starts to come out a little bit as well. What about you, Tim?
You know, God, when I first thought about it, I'm like, oh, this is easy, right? You lead people, you manage functions, but man, we could talk about this forever because I think there's so many ways to go with this because I do think entry-level people as they promote, they probably are more managers than leaders. They kind of have to learn how to lead. Some people would argue you can't teach somebody to lead, but you can teach them how to manage. Like there's so many ways we can go. I definitely think there's a difference. And I tend to think like as you become a better manager and manage your people, manage your staff, you can then have capacity to start to lead
Right.
if that's what you want to do.
So let me give you one example, Tim. Like when you talk to people about like training managers of people, this is what I love because we try and do some of this, and we do it for some different companies. And when you talk to people about that like core manager of people training, one of the first things they'll say is, hey, so it could be a company with 500 people, and they would say, hey, really, my leadership team and the next level below them doesn't really need that training. And one was like, well, why? Why don't they need the training? If these are the core skills that are important for managing people, why wouldn't they model them and be your best people at them? So I think kind of that disconnect. I do like what you said about leadership, being a natural trait rather than something that can be learned. I think there's probably some studies that show that some leaders are just natural, but I think like that, what I just described, that drives me crazy when people say, yeah, but our leadership team, who by the way, earn 100 and 120K in a small company, they don't really need these skills.
Yeah, slow down, Katie. We got them some Zig Ziglar tapes. They're fine. They have it, right? Like,
right.
I just think it's one of those things that, and again, I don't tend to believe this natural born leaders philosophy. I think there are those folks, but I also think you can teach somebody to be a leader as well, or people can learn that through experiences, and it's really desire to me. If you want to learn, if you lead people, you learn the right behaviors and you live them. Either people are going to follow you or they're not.
Hey, and I would say this, Tim. We'll throw it back to Allison. Is I would say the only difference between leaders and managers are that the true leaders get to make decisions about how everyone's going to manage and talk to people in their company and about what's most important. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, at Applebee's we had we did a letter system, right? So an A decision, B decision, C decision. An A decision meant you as a leader you had full responsibility to make that decision. A B one was a decision where you were going to share responsibility in that decision, and a C one, crap was just going to happen to you, right? So leader, truly defined leader, that you had a decision making ability.
Right. Got it. Makes sense. Allison, back to you.
Yeah, no, I think this leads right into the next question where you're talking about, like, how do leaders prove they're actually walking the walk? So they want to train people to be leaders, but how do they prove that they themselves are doing the same thing and they think that that's an important trait?
Tim, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think one of the traits that I look for in leadership is consistency. That they're not gonna swing high and low necessarily based on what they're doing. So if they say, hey, here's what we're going to do, they're very consistent in making sure they're continuing to do that. Along with that then becomes walking the walk, kind of thing to say, hey, because here's a classic manager versus leader scenario is you go to somebody and say, well, Tim, you just need to go and address that directly with Kris. And then the person sends off like bomb emails behind the scenes, to their direct reports because they don't have the guts themselves to do that same thing. Where a true leader would go and have those direct conversations face to face with their own direct reports as they tell people to do the same thing. So they're demonstrating to their people like, hey, here's how we're going to walk, and then we're going to do it all together.
Yeah, and Tim, I'll take it back to, what I described. I think leaders get to decide like what's most important in the company
Hmm.
and what type of conversation should be happening as you get work done in the company. And then I think once you decide that, like let's say that you get really formal with it, and formal is probably the wrong word, but let's say you get really, disciplined about it, and you say, hey, we've got a certain way that we want to coach teammates and people on teams in our organization. Well, if you put that coaching methodology in place, to your point, you can't fire off 6 emails if you pride yourself on like working through some type of coaching methodology.
Hmm.
You have to be able to use that with your direct reports, who, by the way, may be actually managing people that do the work, right? So I love your point about you can't hide from, the ways that you're espousing that you want to do it. I think leaders get to decide how people get led in a company and how you want managers to do that work. But I think that people really walk the walk, or leaders walk the walk by, I think one of the key words, react to this for me, Tim. I think leaders need to be really vulnerable enough to fail. So for example, like everybody else, I'll keep on the coaching methodology front. If you roll out training on a coaching methodology, almost no one is comfortable doing that initially, right?
Yeah.
No one's comfortable with it. It's clunky until you really get.
Uh-oh, we lost Kris.
So no, I'll respond, right? Because I do think what he's talking about is this ability, for leaders to kind of come through if they're going to do this coaching methodology, which is we're going to sit down and have this kind of one-on-one. They get really kind of freaked out by that. So I agree with that. The one thing I was going to throw back to him was this concept around and then he just made me forget about this entire thing because he just jumped off.
He's coming back. He's coming back. We're good.
But Allison, why don't you go ahead, go to the next question, and by the time he gets in, I'll answer it, and then we'll get it to him.
Well, it kind of like, oh, he's back.
I'm back.
All right, do you want to finish your point?
Where did you lose me? And I'll be quick.
Right at the end when you were talking about the coaching methodology.
Yeah, so what I was saying was I think leaders have to be vulnerable enough, like once they decide how people are going to be led in the organization, they've got to model those skills, and they're going to be vulnerable enough to show that, hey, it's not always going to go perfect, and I don't even have to be the best one at this in the organization. Yeah. I just have to be the sponsor, and I've got to be open enough to show people that I can actually like fail at it, and that failure is okay as long as you're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, because I think that's where when we say where most leaders I think fail is when it's always that do as I say, not as I do, right?
Right.
And that always used to be common, like, oh, I'm in this kind of corner office, and I can do what I have to do. Don't pay attention to what I'm doing.
Right.
You do what I'm telling you to do, and I think that's where almost every leader I've ever known failed. And I agree with you that ability to fail and be very upfront with your people to say, hey, I screwed up, and we're going to go a different direction, or we're going to do this, and do that in a public manner. I think just it ingratiates people to be able to follow you and come with you.
Right. Tim, tell me about the best leader. Don't name he or she by name, but tell me about a leader that you had that did what you just described.
Gosh, I've had quite a few. One of the people I worked with, to me, they were classic in being able to come forward to the organization constantly, and and again, they were very clear about, hey, here's the direction we want to go. But as we went down that direction, as things have to change, or corporate maybe higher level decisions come down, they would come and be very transparent about why the decision was being made to make a change or make a move in that direction, and letting their people know, which gained buy-in so much quicker. And it allowed all of us to make that move and turn and go a different direction without going, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And I think that's a really good trait to have.
One of the best leaders I ever had, and I try and model this as much as I can. We're all imperfect, but they really wanted to create. I'm gonna like capture one of the words you use, transparency. They were big that, hey, we don't want to have infighting, and the best way not to have infighting is to make sure that everyone is giving information freely, and keeping people in the loop. And it's one of those things, I see it even today, is that we rationalize not giving people information because we don't want to overwhelm them. When really it's kind of a two-sided thing. I think it's rationalization because we don't want people to get involved in the decision-making process. So the leader I have was great about saying, hey, what we're going to do is you're responsible for making sure all these people know what's going on. They've got to just deal with it, and if they don't respond to you, it's fine. But don't let them be surprised like down the road. And that individual really modeled that. He did great work in terms of making sure that everybody had line of sight to things that were important, even if maybe they were just a contributor to that and not a decision maker. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, I see managers do that again haven't reached that next level where they try to limit. Part of it's a power play, right? Like, hey, I have some information, somebody does it, and they haven't reached that leader level yet. They're still managing. And to me, that's a classic example of how you can tell if somebody's a leader or a manager, if they love to hold on to little bits of information because it creates a power of them knowing and somebody else not knowing.
Right.
But that also then it's basically them going, I don't really want to have to deal with these conversations, so I'm just not going to let people know everything going on. I'm going to save them some heartache. That's what they think, right?
Right.
But the reality is they just don't want to have those difficult conversations.
And I think leaders, and we'll throw it back to Allison after this, real leaders know or have got the battle scars to prove this. They know that if they don't give up that information and if they don't encourage everybody to keep that information flowing freely, worse decisions get made, you have worse business results, and you have a lot of infighting that ultimately just involves people leaving the team or generally not being happy. So you're better off having the conversations and spending the time. And then leaders, the other thing I think leaders do is they know when to shut that down. They know when there's some dialogue, and then they know when to say, hey, you know what, we've had good dialogue here. You should all be encouraged by that, but I'm the boss. That's what they pay me the money for. So I've heard everything. I'm making the call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always call that like knowledge hoarding, like when
yes.
it freaks people out, but they just don't want to share it, and it just ends up snowballing into something that's far worse than if they just divulged at the beginning. Whether or not they shared the entire thing, they could have just said something, and it wouldn't have spiraled out of control. So I totally
the cover up is always worse than
sure.
than the result of not hoarding knowledge. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we only have a couple more minutes, but I did want to tie this back into kind of how what you guys have been discussing, how that can actually turn and use learning and development programs for leadership training. Do you have any thoughts on that, succession planning and things like that?
So, Tim, let's talk a little bit about what's out there. I think the first thing people would really point to is probably leadership competencies, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like, I'm almost like making myself fall asleep by saying that word, leadership competencies. But I do think there's some value there. I think you've got to say, what do we really believe that successful leaders look like in our company? And whether you call them leadership competencies, whether you call them like a section 2 on a performance review of somebody that manages people or you consider to be a leader at a certain level, or whether you simply evaluate people like on those in your succession planning, you want to have some kind of framework that says, hey, this is what we believe a leader looks like in our company. And then if you were smart, Tim, I'll throw it to you to comment on both that and what I'm about to say. If you were smart, you probably want to hire people into leadership positions with those competencies in mind, and then probably give them feedback about how they're doing on each one of those. So, for example, if transparency doesn't flow from John, you probably need to give him feedback on that, whether it's just as part of your day-to-day, month-to-month coaching, or if it's part of a performance review. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, because we all kind of go blank a little bit when we start talking about competencies, but the reality is the best companies I've worked for that had this all tied together, it started with selection, right, based on competencies for leader. It went into performance. It then goes into succession, and it kind of goes all the way through, and learning and development is the umbrella over all of that, right? And the L&D teams that I worked with always helped us on the talent acquisition side, helped us on the performance side, helped us on the succession side, to really kind of mine out all those competencies. because again, it all fits together. And when you have that thing on the rails going down the path, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. If you try to do it ad hoc and you go, oh yeah, that competency thing's boring, you're just shooting in the dark. Like, you really have no place to go back to and say, wait a minute, we don't seem like we're getting the right talent in the door, or we don't have enough people in succession or ready for promotion. Like, where does it all fit together? Well, you should have that framework.
Hey, and one last thing, we'll get your reaction to this and we'll kick it back to Allison. You know, some of those competencies can probably be trained and developed. Some of them maybe can't. Like, for example, you would see one leadership competency outlined as courage. I don't know if you can make a sheep a lion, right?
No.
But some of them certainly you can train on, and you can do development on.
Yeah, we call those career derailers. So it's one of those things where you go, look, at a point, you have something about you that we just can't teach you, and it's going to derail your career with us. And so you're probably an individual contributor, or you probably reach a ceiling for where you're going to reach leadership with us. And that's just that's an honest conversation you have to have with some folks.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining us, and I think that everyone's gained a little bit of more insights from what you guys have discussed. I will talk to you guys later.
Cool. Thanks, Allison.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Allison.